Quick scan of sources on credibility and objectivity of sources for GP. The previous video is on credibility. This one is about objectivity and it's quick, so let's go. There are four criteria to apply if you check the objectivity of a source, which is regarding the content of the source, in contrast to the credibility, which is assessing the author or the organization behind an article. This is about the text itself. We're going to have a look at these four criteria. Let's start. First thing to check is whether there are any obvious signs of a bias in a source. In a very specific sense, you can see that already in a research design, looking at the headers in each section to see whether the author made a design deliberately giving an advantage to one perspective over the other. And that's what they call a prejudice in English, and that's what we call vooroordeel or vooringenomenheid in Dutch. So please constitute that clearly what a bias is. You can see it like this in a research design. One perspective might be left out. There's a selection of one perspective over the other. A viewpoint might be missing due to the selection or some essential arguments to make sense of some viewpoints or perspectives. All of these are techniques of selectivity in order to influence the research by design, and that's what a bias is. Then, even if there's no obvious sign of a bias, there might be something going on with the evidence in a source. When is evidence good or convincing? In essence, the evidence is significantly describing an object, issue, or event if there are multiple types and sources of evidence corroborating each other, which is supporting each other. What kind of things should you be looking for? Primary evidence and secondary evidence. Primary evidence are often insider perspectives, insider viewpoints. Secondary evidence are from more neutral outsider viewpoints. Both are valuable in combination, and the same thing goes for quantitative evidence and qualitative evidence. And these types of evidence, again, are useful in combinations because the corroboration of these different types of evidence is what making a case strong. If you look at that, please note that statistical data on itself is not self-evidently objective, because the gathering of data might be selective in itself, and if it's not a problem in selecting the data, in the gathering the data, then there might be something wrong with the interpretation of even some headers, just like you can see in the left article. You can label big groups as simply other, just to distract the attention from that case. Now, if that's all okay, if the case looks, the design looks not to be biased, there's a convincing case of different types of information corroborating each other, still then you must know that the author might be cherry picking the good arguments for his own case and some weak parts for the other. Please constitute very clearly if the author leaves any room for alternative interpretation, and if he mentions them, whether he presenting those in a neutral and fair way in order not to make fun of those. If he does do that, then still he might, the best case is if the author gives an honest account of the things he doesn't know or she doesn't know at that point of research, what needs to be done to give more a better sense of significant research results and a better representation of reality. Final thing, check the use of language. If an author uses lots of emotive words, exaggerations of the things he is against or for, or understatements, generalizations are another factor, then you might be wary about biases. Even if the design is okay and all objective criteria seem to be alright, these might be revealing remarks in the text just to see the prejudice in an author's mind. Having said that, if Mr. Leeuw, is this a good source? That's a question I often get. All sources can be useful depending on your research design. You should constitute the function of an article. Is the article used to give an account of one viewpoint, then a slight lack of credibility due to vested interest or lack of neutrality is not an issue, because he's simply advocating for one perspective. He might present only arguments for his case, understandably so. That's okay if you represent a viewpoint and use that article to show what people think. But please check whether you have the best article to represent that viewpoint. Don't use articles which are simply full of rhetoric and just opinion. Use preferably the data, articles with data that are significant, to avoid strawman arguments, to actually put a bias in your own article by putting the weak descriptions of arguments constituting viewpoints. So pay attention to the significance of data and don't pay too much attention to the credibility and some slight bias. But please avoid those articles lacking credibility and objectivity if you use those articles to describe your issue at large, to give to get a sense of what you're talking about anyways, to describe the debate that's going on globally. Then never use those sources where you really kind of suspicious of the lack of credibility and some signs of lack of objectivity. Having said that, writing about this is something you should do throughout in your team projects and individual writing. Cambridge would like to see you using the words credible, objective, and bias. Use them throughout in describing sources, or at least frequently, and add the following words and phrases each instance you introduce a source. That's what they want to see, and that's good habit to have in academic writing, to show that you first assess the credibility and objectivity before just throwing those arguments from those sources in. I'll stop talking. Please have a look at the language support. Stop the video when you need those words and start writing about it. Thank you.